Welcome back. With its mountainous landscapes, awe-inspiring coastlines, and distinct seasons, it's easy to see how Maine can serve as an inspiration for artistic expression, and that includes literature.
Well, the new novel, The Cliffs, centers around a mansion in Maine. Its author, of course, Courtney Sullivan, joins us now to tell us more about her new book and Maine's influence in her writing. First of all, thanks for coming on with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I was so excited to get this in the mail to check it out. First of all, tell us about what inspired this book first.
So my family, I'm from Massachusetts, but my family has always gone to Algonquin, Maine every summer since I was born, before I was born even. And that's just our happy place. We love it there. So when I met my husband, who is from Iowa, I taught him to also love Maine and the ocean. When I first met him, he said, "I don't really like the ocean. I like pools." And I was like, "No, that will not do." So he now loves Maine. Our kids love Maine. About 12 years ago, though, before our kids were born, we were on vacation with another couple, our best friends from Iowa. And we were driving around the Cape Nettic area, and we came upon this beautiful house on a cliff, rolling lawn down to the cliffs and the ocean. It was fully furnished, full of beautiful things, but also clearly abandoned. And for anyone who loved, Nancy Drew or Hardy Boys or even Scooby-Doo, that abandoned house is irresistible to a storyteller.
She's thrown in a Scooby-Doo reference. I like it.
Yes.
My kids are really into Scooby-Doo right now, so I'm like, oh, there's a lot of plotline overlap here.
Can you tell us about some of the characters in the book?
Yes. So Jane is the main character. She is an archivist at the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe, which is a real place in Cambridge. It's an archive of American women. And I've done research there for previous books and always wanted to include it directly in a novel because I think the Schlesinger has a similar kind of mission as to what I'm always thinking about when I'm writing novels, which is that the moment a woman is born will determine so much of who she's allowed to become, essentially. And so, but I started with Jane, and then she's our present day, character. But then I went down so many wonderful research rabbit holes that tied back to Maine. So the Sabbath Day Lake Shaker Village plays a role in the book, and Camp Etna, a spiritualist camp in Etna, Maine, plays a role. And so ultimately this is the story of a house and the land on which it sits and all the women who live in that house over 400 years. My 7-year-old put it a little more succinctly. His friend asked him, "What's your mom's book about?" And my 7-year-old said, "Well, it's about an abandoned house and people who build a mega mansion on top of ghosts, and how women's power will kill you."
Wow.
So I'm now out there using that as my elevator pitch.
There you go.
Why do you choose to focus on the stories of women in Maine? Well, obviously because you are a woman, but that's why it's got to be a major inspiration.
Yeah, I've lived a life of, I went to Smith College, a women's college in Massachusetts, and I've always been really mostly drawn to stories of women, and particularly stories of people in general that maybe haven't been told as they could be. So this book also looks at the indigenous people, the Wabanaki people of Maine, and sort of pokes hold in this idea that we have in New England of being the first to do something. Where I live in Massachusetts, we have this thing that's called America's First Weather Observatory. And of course, every time I see that, I think to myself, but there were 10,000 years of indigenous people living here before this place was built, and I'm pretty sure they observed weather. So, just because we call something the first doesn't really mean it was the first. And it's often the first time a white man does something is the first. That's kind of what it comes down to. So it's kind of trying to fill in those holes in history.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And can you tell us a little bit more about your background? And you have another book called Maine that was also a bestseller, a New York Times bestseller.
I do, yes. So that was my second novel. And this one is my 6th So I think that came out about 12 years ago, but I grew up in Massachusetts in the Boston area, in a suburb of Boston. Then I went to college and lived in New York for 20 years. And then I had two little kids, and we ended up moving back to my hometown in Massachusetts, which was really not on my bingo card. I didn't see that coming after 20 years in New York, but I'm very, very happy to be back in New England. And I always have written about Massachusetts and Maine. I think because those were the places I wanted to be, even when I wasn't. And so it was an opportunity to sort of visit them in my imagination.
For the cliffs, I mean, what intrigued you to write this story, and why do you think it's going to resonate with the readers?
Well, I think so far, those who've read it, I think they've enjoyed being taken into maybe aspects of a place they love, Maine, but parts of it they didn't necessarily know much about. And the sort of historical elements of the story, particularly that indigenous piece, that's something that a lot of people have said has resonated with them. And then it has all these other things that I always write about too, which is sort of family dysfunction and female friendship, and alcoholism plays a role in this book, as it does in many of my books. So, it's kind of like a juicy relationship, family, friendship novel, as well as a bit of a historical novel.
And finally, where can people learn more and get a copy?
The book should be available wherever books are sold. So wherever you like to buy your books, you can buy it. And I have a website, jcourtneysullivan.com, so you can find out about tour dates and things there.
Sounds great. Hey, one thing I did notice in there, it mentioned ghosts. Is something scary about this since we have Halloween coming up?
That's a good point. I was just thinking that. I forgot to talk about ghosts.
Well, you did
Yeah.
mention Scooby-Doo, so you know.
Yes, that great literary reference I made earlier. Yes, my editor always describes this book as a ghost story for people who don't believe in ghosts. And I don't actually know. I think it's more a ghost story for skeptics, or for people who are ghost curious, maybe. There is a question of, is this house haunted? That's a big part of this book. And I think I was interested as a writer in kind of probing what's the difference between haunting and history. The stories we tell ourselves about the past versus the past being delivered to us through a medium or some other means. But certainly there's a little bit of ghostiness in this one for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to read this, Courtney. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Congratulations.
Thanks for having me.